There are a lot of people out there who would prefer to just have every single player in their starting lineup be just some star and have zero depth behind it. But I don't think that makes sense at all for a lot of reasons. Stars are great. You need stars to win. But when you have zero depth behind it, it can end up screwing your team over. So, the reason I was thinking about this was because there's a lot of teams like the San Francisco 49ers who have a ton of depth at a lot of positions. And in my opinion, that's what makes them a Super Bowl contender. Because if you look at their roster on paper, they have stars. Not a ton of stars, but they have star players. But they still produce even with only having a couple stars. For example, they have, I'd probably say 6 or 7 wide receivers that can all play, at least at an above average rate. Now, star players are great, depth's better, and that's because, one, you can get a variety of different players when you have more depth. Let's say your starter is a good, not great edge rusher whose primary skill set revolves around speed. Speed rush moves like quick swim, spin moves, getting off the ball quicker than the opponent. Let's say that's your starter. If you have 1 or 2 guys behind him, you can go from that starter coming in being primarily speed to having your backup being primarily a run defender or somebody who focuses on their bull rush and power. And that puts the opposing offense off balance because they can't get used to one style of play. Meanwhile, for example, the 49ers offensive line is trying to block Von Miller, and Von Miller plays 98% of the snaps. They can get used to Von Miller's style of play, and it can get easier over time to adjust to it. When you have multiple players with multiple different skill sets, you have to change your technique completely in order to stop that. Another example of this is wide receiver skill sets. You could have a guy who isn't the best athlete in the world and has a great set of hands, but he is just an elite route runner on top of it. Creates a separation at the point of the route breaking. Then you can have another player that's completely different. That player could be an incredibly gifted athlete. 4.3 speed, not the best route runner, but good enough. Not the best hands, but can catch him when he's open. That'll throw everything on the defensive side of the ball off. Because when you have a change like that, you have to use different techniques. You have to be prepared mentally for different styles. It's a lot more effort when you have a variety like that. Another huge factor in why depth is extremely important is health. And I think this is one that most people think of when they think of depth. When you're star dependent, like the Texans who have to have J.J. Watt produce on defense or their defense is struggling, when you have a team like that, when something happens to that J.J. Watt player, the team struggles because they're used to him carrying the load and they can kind of help out here and there based off what he already brings to the table, but he doesn't have that same production there. They don't have the same guys focusing on him to where they can just kind of sneak past and get a play. They can't do that when the star's gone. When that production drops, you can find a significant amount of teams when the star's gone, their style of play is thrown out of whack. So they have to adjust their team. Once they adjust their team, they end up playing different because they don't have the same personnel. They can't play the same. When they change that style of play, let's say it wasn't a long-term injury for the star player. When that star player comes back, they have to change it again. So you're changing how you're playing twice based off one player. And that can cripple a team. Because I know a lot of people out there have played football, and a lot of people will be able to understand. When you change how you're supposed to play twice, it can be confusing for people. It can be difficult for people to play multiple different ways when they're really only a specialist. Now, another huge part of why depth is important is stamina. There are a lot of games I watch in the NFL where the star player is just absolutely gassed by the end of the game. As a Texans fan, I've seen it from J.J. Watt. I've seen it from Jadeveon Clowney when he was playing when J.J. got hurt. I've seen it from Nick and Joey Bosa. I've seen it from Khalil Mack. Those guys get gassed because they have to do everything. When you have depth as opposed to being top heavy, you don't have to worry about your players being gassed because you can bring in a fresh player. And when you bring in a fresh player like that, not only does it make your opposing team change their style if they're different type of players, like I was saying earlier with the speed and the power guys, when they have to change that style of play on top of their players getting tired, it's going to make it a lot more difficult for them to keep up. And that's one of the things that made the Baltimore Ravens so great last year. They had depth at a lot of defensive positions, and their defense was able to just go out there and crack people. And then as soon as one guy gets tired, they can replace him with a guy who can do a good enough job until the better player can come in. So yeah, those are my thoughts on why having depth is more important than being top heavy and having a few stars carry your entire team. If you like the video, be sure to like, subscribe, leave a comment. Let me know your thoughts on it, whether you'd like a star-loaded lineup or more depth. And be sure to check out my podcast that I host with one of my good friends, Mr. Mediocre. The link to his channel and his Twitter will be down in the description. Also, go and check out a couple of my buddies at Texans Unfiltered. They have a YouTube channel, and they also have a platform on Spotify. You can go check them out. Be sure to also go and listen to the Broad Entertainment podcast, because that's dropping right now, actually.